Good morning, everyone. Oh, that was lukewarm. That was a good practice. I invite you to try that again. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Excellent. Thank you so much for joining us. My name's Christy Bolingbroke. I'm the Executive Artistic Director for the National Center for Choreography in Akron, Ohio. And it is with immense pleasure and excitement that we get to take our Making Moves events out on the road outside of Ohio for the first time right here in Nashville. How about giving a round of applause? A little bit of background if you are new to NCCAkron. The National Center for Choreography is envisioned as a research and development space to help create new work in dance. And in investing in our systems and our curation and continuing to adapt to the national landscape with an added goal to advocate for dance and the creative process as an essential part of culture in this country, we also strive to strengthen the national ecosystem. And so it became very evident as we started to help new dances get made and exploring those possibilities that we were also participating in a broken system. And we needed to find other ways, not just from the front, not just from helping new product get made, but what are the different parts of the landscape that we could play with. And that's what led to our Creative Admin Research Program. Creative Administrative Research is predicated on the idea there isn't one way of making dances, so there shouldn't be just one way of doing dance business. And many of you have heard this from me before, that nonprofit is just a tax distinction. It is not a complete business model. And so in our Creative Admin Research Program, we spend time questioning quote unquote best practices, because best is not best for everyone. That one size fits all actually fits very few. And so being able to explore those through CAR then led to our second book, Artists on Creative Administration. Thank you. And there are several contributing authors in the audience tonight, and that is what's behind our Making Moves program. So we get to come to town. We've brought a couple of the contributing authors, but then even more so are excited to highlight local case studies, because just because you don't have an essay in the book doesn't mean that you aren't already doing this work as well. And so what I'm super excited about is realizing that the book is not the beginning, middle, and end of the discussion. It is a conversation starter. And that is what we are going to do here today. With that in mind, I want to extend a special thank you to our Nashville Host Committee and the Nashville Public Library for having us in these spaces. I'll be coming back more throughout our session together. There is a QR code to scan for the performance program, and you can read everyone's bios in full. But to kick us off, I would like to welcome to the stage Nashville choreographer and contributing author, Bouldin.
Oh, the microphone's working. I didn't know people from Tennessee wore shoes, my new resident advisor joked. I laughed, trying to hide my shock and embarrassment. I could feel the heat in my face, turning my cheeks bright red. Yeah, don't you sit on tree stumps at school instead of chairs? The young dancer next to me laughed, air quoting school with her fingers. It was the summer of 1996. I had just turned 15 and was thrilled to be one of 40 young dancers attending Juilliard's first ever summer dance intensive. It was my first time in New York and the first of many times navigating being stereotyped as a Southerner. That summer, the assumptions other dancers made about me on hearing my accent or learning where I was from were clear. How could someone talented enough to get into Juilliard come from a place like Nashville, Tennessee? A small city known primarily at that time as the home of country music, Nashville was hardly considered a metropolis, and everyone made sure to let me know. Eager to blend in and excel in my dance studies, I spent the next month working to eradicate my Southern drawl and adopt new ways of behaving that seemed more neutral to me. Just as my mind and body were learning new ways of moving through modern and contemporary choreography, I was trying on new pronunciations and body language outside the studio. By the end of that summer, I had gained new friends and a new vision for my future. I wanted to become a professional contemporary dancer, and there was nowhere else, so I thought, where I could receive the kind of excellent, diverse training and networking opportunities I'd begun to taste in New York. Grudgingly, I went home to Nashville and begged my mother to help me strategize a way to leave Tennessee. Back home, the issue of my southernness was defined by a lack of opportunity. In Nashville, I had access to good ballet training, but there was nowhere in all of Tennessee where I could continue the kind of modern and contemporary training I'd experienced at Juilliard. I already knew at 15 I would have to leave Nashville to get the education I needed and to have the career in contemporary dance that I wanted. 2 years later, I was accepted to Juilliard on scholarship and early admission, and I left Nashville with no intention of returning. Why would I? There was nowhere for me to dance. Here I am 22 years later, telling the story of how I came home and helped build the contemporary dance scene here in Nashville. My experience at Juilliard shaped many of the values and philosophies that still drive my work today, gifting me with a lifelong appreciation for collaboration, creative process, and approaching movement like a researcher. Our director saw dancers not as men or women, but as artists, before terminology like gender nonconformity and non-binary were available to me to discuss the nuances of my gender identity. Ben believed contemporary dancers were limitless in our capacity to embody and express, and this invigorated me. As a ballet dancer, my gender had predetermined every step I danced and every role that I played. Now, as a contemporary dancer, I felt seen and at home in my body. I emerged from 4 years of rigorous study as a dance polyglot, able to speak multiple movement languages with my body thanks to choreographers like Ohad Naharin, Margie Gillis, and Robert Battle, and the numerous methods I studied. Over the next 8 years, I lived the dream I had conditioned myself to pursue. I worked with major choreographers and companies, lived in New York and Stockholm and Paris, toured internationally. I was almost always in rehearsal, performing, or on the road. Approaching my 30s, I was fatigued and disillusioned by the realities of a life that sounded like what I wanted. But instead of feeling successful, I felt used up, with so many of my best ideas exploited by a system that viewed women as muses, not as makers. Choreographers took advantage of my collaborative nature and composition skills without publicly acknowledging my collaborative contributions. And no matter how avant-garde the works were aesthetically, the infrastructures driving many of their creative processes, I found, were patriarchal and sometimes even abusive. These realities of my professional experience left me questioning whether I wanted to dance anymore at all. Feeling unmoored, I left the security of a full-time company job in Stockholm and retreated into project-based work with trusted friends and colleagues. After 2 years of jumping from project to project, I sought a safe space far from the dance meccas I knew, where I could process all that was troubling me. I left Paris and returned to Nashville. In 2010, I found a small apartment not far from where I'd grown up and began sifting through what I believed was the wreckage of my dance career. To make ends meet, I taught weekly contemporary technique and improvisation classes for Vanderbilt University and at Nashville Ballet. My approach to these classes was very light at first. I felt no ambition. I was sharing what I knew with people who were taking contemporary dance for fun, and not one person in my classes had heard of any of the famous choreographers I'd worked with. I was surprised by how refreshing this anonymity felt. The names I had worn like badges on a Letterman jacket meant nothing in Nashville, and it was totally liberating. With this new freedom, I began to question the relationship between access and success, geography and opportunity. In my classes, I met and worked with talented dancers who, like me years before, lacked access to networks, information, and experience. I began to think almost every talented dancer I had met in New York was from somewhere else. What if it were possible to bring the same opportunities for contemporary training, creative residencies, and performances that had existed in New York to Nashville? Could artists be given a choice in whether they stayed or left to realize their goals? Still troubled by the disparity between the way the field talked about collaboration and how it actually played out, I needed to know dance environments could value the voices and mental health of everyone in the room, including mine. This process of questioning and embracing the needs around me allowed me to let go of unhelpful influences from the past, and I dove deeper into my own interests. Over the next 3 years, I devoted myself to growing a following for my dance classes in Nashville and getting to know the fragmented local dance community, all while uncovering my own choreographic voice and passion for pioneering a new contemporary dance scene in the South. By 2013, there were 10 dancers regularly taking class 2 times a week. They came from different corners of the Nashville dance community. Some were young students who aspired to dance professionally. Others were former ballet dancers, some were teachers. There was even a contemplative psychotherapist in our ranks. And though different in many regards, we all shared a love for research and longed for more opportunities to move and create together. My relationship with these dancers and our collective awareness of the challenges we faced as artists craving access to what had never been available to us in Nashville are what catalyzed New Dialect into existence. That April, inspired by our solidarity, I outlined what became New Dialect's mission and founding vision statement and penned a business model diagram on a napkin. Fast forward some years, when the pandemic hit in March 2020, New Dialect was at a crossroads. I was fatigued from founder burnout. Maybe you've heard of it. Many artists who had danced with the company for years now wanted the flexibility to create their own works and participate in other projects. Theaters were being shuttered, performances canceled, just as our company was preparing to tour throughout the Southeast. Faced with these challenges and with support from NCCAkron's Creative Administration Research Program, I opted to experiment with an adaptable structure for New Dialect that would allow us to respond to pandemic-related hardships and the Nashville dance community's evolving needs with hopeful sensitivity and agility. New Dialect left the traditional dance company model behind for something totally unknown. 2 years later, we refer to ourselves as a practice, not a company. We work in a decentralized, team-based structure and on a project basis, building the artistic and administrative teams for productions, residencies, and intensives as they happen, so that we can really prioritize space for our collective reflection and assessment. We left the scarcity mindset that drove our visibility in the beginning behind, and instead adopted a philosophy of injecting more of our passion and more of our resources into fewer activities, to do less, better. Since New Dialect first began our work in 2013, the contemporary dance scene in Nashville has grown tremendously. Today there are several projects, small companies, new collaborations, even new festivals that are led by artists and producers who've worked with New Dialect or even relocated to join us in blazing a trail. Where 10 years ago, I and a small group of dancers longed for access to the opportunities we saw in other cities, now many more of us are facing a whole new challenge together: sustainability. Increased access and opportunities as it happens are only part of the picture. And while the number of contemporary dancers, choreographers, classes, and productions in Nashville has multiplied, the resources available to support our work are relatively unchanged. To date, New Dialect's vision for fostering a thriving contemporary dance ecosystem in Nashville remains aspirational. And the shift in our emphasis from access to sustainability is bringing to light new questions about partnership, combining resources, cooperation, the value of competition, and the role we hope to play in our art form's evolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Banning. I'm now going to invite Christian Sinclair and Jonathan Wynn from Sold Collective to join me here on stage. How y'all doing?
Doing good. Yeah,
Okay.
doing great. Check the mic.
And just to be clear, you're not a dance duet?
We can be,
Yeah, we can. Yeah. If you want like no rhythm from 6 feet over people dancing, sure.
No, you want to make sure that people, before they get to listen to your story, are starting from the right place. And so maybe we begin there. What is Sold Collective's origin story?
Man, so I'll say early February 2022, me and him first met at All People Coffee Shop here in East Nashville. I remember telling some of my friends out here to go visit them while they're here in this weekend. Me and him were baristas there. I'm still am. We never would work together, but we had our first shift, one of those closing shifts at night where we got a chance to know each other more, got a chance to talk more about our dreams and aspirations. And man, we just had a heart-to-heart talk about how we want more safe spaces in Nashville that celebrate BIPOC arts and culture. And it was very heartfelt to where after that, he hit me and was just like, man, let's do a poetry night here at this coffee shop. And we went through that process. We had no expectations of how it was gonna go, things like that. And when we did, a lot of people showed up, a lot of people came, it was a line out the door, and it was just a memorable moment to where, afterwards, a lot of people just like, man, this is great. When's the next one? And me and Sinclair were just like,
You don't know.
so we were just like, okay. So from then on, me and him just came together and started being intentional about just putting on events together for the community to where we understood and kind of created this mission to where we just want to bring people together over the love of BIPOC arts and culture and do so by focusing on education, collaboration, and access. With this mission, we kind of see this vision to where there is equitable access to BIPOC arts and culture just as much as access to white mainstream spaces here in Nashville.
Yeah, and what started off as 5 people, just me and him, and then 3 other people randomly in the shop were like, hey, can we be a part? Can we be friends? So what started as 5 people led to now we have 22 people on the team. And what inspired this was we didn't just want to become a group that hosted events. We didn't just want to become that cliche, it's a group of guys, a group of friends that are just doing this random things. We want to be very intentional with everything that we did. So from then on, we did block parties, workshops, collaborations with Frisk Art Museum. We have sponsors, donors, all the things. We just want to really hone in on that community aspect to where we're just not hosting random things. We're actually giving back to our mission, our values with a nonprofit.
I love that. And I often say, whatever it takes to fuel the conversation. Coffee often is a case, and it sounds like that was a place and brought y'all together for sure, too. What I love, Sinclair, in our conversation is you said, but we're a cool nonprofit. And I would love to invite you to define, what does a cool nonprofit mean?
Yeah, so I have background working in nonprofit spaces and corporate spaces and all the things, and we know how stuffy and cold it can be. So when we tell people that we're a nonprofit, they're like, oh, that's cool. But we're like, no, we're an actual, legitimate cool nonprofit. We're hosting events that people want to come to. Mm-hmm. We give platform people who want to host, events and projects. We cater to that culture of the Gen Z, early, adults, demographic. We try to do everything, like I said earlier, intentional, but also in a very non-traditional way. We want to make the space as equitable as possible and accessible as possible for anyone who is interested in joining.
And because we also talked a little bit about nonprofit being a tax distinction, I'm curious the choice to actually incorporate as a nonprofit too. Can you speak anything to making that decision?
Yeah,
because you can be cool without that tax distinction.
We also need the money though, but
that's real.
It's kind of interesting, we were just doing things, started to solidify, refine ourselves, and I think that's the funny thing, most people kind of just, think about it and then kind of be scared to take that step, but we were just kind of moving, and then we'll kind of refine as we move and do that, and from then on, we realized that like you said, we didn't want to just be that event group that's just putting things on And you know, I think for both of us, we wanted to make collaborations and, you know, do things with like people in the mainstream spaces, in corporate spaces. I think one of the things that I love about us is that we try to be that bridge between the community and mainstream spaces to where, like, you know, to be able to do that, it did kind of make sense for us to step into that nonprofit sector to where they can see how serious we are and that we're not just doing this, you know, just leisurely and casually.
Yeah, and then like later down the line, we'll provide grants and scholarships and other opportunities for creatives to apply to that we can easily get from donor dollars and, you know, physical sponsors like Wynn said.
Putting the money to good and not just relying on your social capital as that bridge to community.
Yeah.
As co-founders and you have collective in the name, how do you make decisions?
You know, we met as friends, came together as business partners. The one thing I feel like with just any relationship, you know, you want to see the best out of each other, and also get a chance to learn each other's strengths, weaknesses, things that we're growing into, and basically just things to where, like, you know, I know he's better in this than me. I'm better at this than him. I think over time we just kind of like naturally came together and understood, like, you know, we're not putting our ego into this dynamic, our pride into this dynamic. We want the main goal. We have the same goals and aspirations for. So whatever is best, being able to like talk it out, communicate, you know, directly, and being able to problem solve together. I think that kind of just all correlates with just either a business, a relationship, a team. I think that's just something that we kind of naturally begin to like just grow over time to see what we can do and really just make decisions from that.
Yeah, and it's about balance too. He's an amazing business partner. I mean, truly, I have like 10,000 ideas in my head of different projects I want to do and initiatives, and, you know, I'll have it all scrambled out on paper and, you know, come to him. He was like, well, you know, we got to do this, and like, how are we gonna get the money for this? Like, he'll bring me back down to earth to where like it's actually attainable, and we plan it out. But you need people like that to balance out that creativity, but also logistical standpoints of it. Decision making, I think we split everything, you know, just 50-50. There are things that, you know, initiatives he wants to do that I want to do, we'll come to a middle ground and do it together. Yeah, and then the team, very collaborative. We try not to operate on that hierarchical basis within Sold. Yes, come to us for decisions and all the things, and like we make the executive decisions for the nonprofit. But we also value like that open door aspect. If you have an idea for an event, this is your thing, we're here to support you. That's how we always operate. That's how we'll always operate going forward.
And to add, Christy, you know, I love his character. You know, he knows my character. I think when entering in business with anybody, because I remember talking to a friend a while ago about how he entered into business with somebody that's great professionally, but personally he cheats on his wife, or he does something that's like not good, and like
No names.
no names, but like when it made me kind of just think more so like, why would I want to work with somebody in business that's like personally like this way, and it doesn't kind of like correlate professionally. And I think something I love about us is that we sharpen each other personally and as it reflects into professionally as well.
Amazing. And you each have a whole host of individual practices and skills. Sinclair, you have a photography practice. Wynn, you've been an athlete as part of a team, as well as have a writing practice. How do those experiences inform your work in Sold Collective?
Love that question. So full-time, I'm a communications manager, photographer as well, curator and creative director. So I'm like knee deep in the creative scene. So just bringing those skills and what I've learned like in my past corporate jobs and past nonprofit jobs, bring that into Sold. And then Wynn, you know, just being that really key and admin work and, you know, the writing and like the correspondence and all that. I mean, it ties in perfectly.
Yeah, and you know, for me growing up, I was always into sports and arts. I would go play outside, and sometimes my mom would take me to Barnes & Noble or to the library to read books or visit things and whatnot. And I think that kind of just translated through my upbringing all the way up to through Vanderbilt, playing football there, going to the NFL for a few years, playing there. And I think for me, I always had that tug between creativity and sports. And I think the one things about me is that, when I did get a chance to hang up my cleats, I always made sure my whole identity wasn't wrapped around sports. And for me, I always had arts, I always had something else going on. So when it did make time to make that transition and at the time I didn't know what God had in store for me, but I'm glad that it, just naturally processed into what we're doing now. It was easy for me to transfer the tools I learned from sports into what we're doing now.
Lots of tools.
Yes.
Yes, gotta have a full toolbox. So what's the vision for Sold Collective? What are you looking forward to? Do you have a space, sort of kind of like, where do you go from here?
Yeah, we don't have a space, but if y'all know somebody, let us know. No, I think this going into 25, we're really focusing on our philanthropic, endeavors and community engagement, physical sponsors, all the things, like really honing in on, the nonprofit work. We're excited to announce we're launching an after-school program in March. It's a 6 to 8 week program. We are partnering with Cockrell Elementary here in town. And it's a two-day out of the week program. We're in the classroom on Mondays, and on Thursdays we'll take them out into the community to art spaces, art museums, the symphony, and have like a mentor, situation. So this is something that's been on my vision board for years, even before Soul was a thing. So to be able to see this like unfold and come to fruition with these kids is something we're really excited about.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, I think we're definitely honing in on philanthropic actions, but also just giving back to the kids. We do a lot of things for age gap 23 through 40, but now we starting to understand more of like doing things with the kids and the youth, and trying to be able to have that on top of the other events that we do.
Because eventually they will be in the 23 to 40 age group.
Yes, they
so
will.
I see you're investing early.
Investing early, and I think one of the things me and him talk about is the work that we're doing now. The next generation is going to thank us and actually like understand like what we did was pioneering for the growth of Nashville, but for the growth of people that is being raised in Nashville. So, yeah.
Yeah, and to that too, growing up, I didn't have any arts programs or a nonprofit that focused on arts and culture that say, hey, you can be a dancer, you can be a painter, a visual artist, all these things. So being able to invest early in these kids, let them know that you can make a career out of this, or even if it's not a career, this is an interest you can have for people who don't have that access to it.
Amazing. Anything else to add?
To that point, and I think from some of my friends out there, like having to be able to create a career towards arts and business, and how arts, the entrepreneurship of arts and your talent can come together and be a career. I know, back in the day, they probably didn't speak about that on career day or speak about that in those situations for classrooms, teachers. They probably talked about the money aspect of it, but I think now, for all of us in here, we know how you can, add the arts and creativity to being able to like monetize, being able to like, do something, admin work that kind of combines with it. I think it has, it has benefits to that.
I can't believe none of us said it in our prep conversation. The words creative entrepreneur, like we couldn't say it enough. It was just like dropping us in. I'm so grateful to be able to hear more of your stories, and would like to invite all of you, let's offer a round of applause for these creative entrepreneurs. Sold Collective, Jonathan Wynn, Christian Sinclair. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
And with that, I'd like to invite Jennifer Turner from TPAC and Mark Murphy from Oz Arts to join me here on stage. Like Goldilocks, I'm just gonna find a different chair. Yeah, however much leg room you need.
But I'm wearing a green thing, so
Amazing. Would each of you briefly introduce yourselves and that 30-second elevator speech for your organization?
Sure. My name is Jennifer Turner. I'm the president and CEO of Tennessee Performing Arts Center. We are a multi-purpose performing arts center. We have 3 resident organizations, the Nashville Ballet, the Nashville Opera, and Nashville Rep. And in addition to that, we run the touring Broadway series. We also started an international dance series 3 years ago. This is our 3rd season. We have a robust family series, and we do a statewide education and community engagement program, and also delighted to host events such as 21 Yeses with New Dialect last night and other things. So we're doing the things.
And Mark?
My name is Mark Murphy, Executive and Artistic Director of Oz Arts Nashville, which for 10 and a half years has been a center for contemporary culture, and in particular, contemporary art and performance, with an emphasis on the next evolution in the development of the performing arts, dance as well as music and theater and mixed media. We have programs that are national and international on the presenting side, and also programs to help support the development of local artists. We're in a 10,000 square foot warehouse, a creative warehouse, we call it, in West Nashville. That was the former home of a cigar company.
Yes. So we just got to hear from Sold Collective, which is very much on the early side, a cool but grassroots approach to community. And both of your organizations would be probably some of the larger nonprofit organizations in town. And in our bigger conversation at NCCAkron about the national ecosystem, presenting organizations and venues are critical ecological players for the distribution of dance, both local dance makers as well as the national network. But I'm curious, how would you describe your organizations, each of them individually, your approach to building a community around dance and the contemporary performing arts?
Let me start. So I arrived in Nashville about, it's been about 5.5 years, and I've been in arts organizations in Washington, D.C., Chicago, Southern California, and started my career working in opera in Detroit. And in many of those markets, the connection to community was always extremely important. And coming into TPAC, my observation was that our programming tended to be a little bit more of a venue, a bunch of one-nighters. There wasn't a lot of connectivity. And so, one, it was important to me to sort of establish a brand for arts and culture. I thought that it was important for the artists that were going to be performing on our stages to know that they were not performing at just a place to see a production, but they were performing at a place that is known for arts and culture. And that, to me, was extremely relevant to then understanding what the community was here. In every market I've been in, you have to serve the community that you're in. And so it was, to me, not responsible to just bring touring and not pay attention to what the local community was. Banning was one of the first people that I got to meet over Zoom during COVID, because I arrived right before COVID. And as I started to meet artists in Nashville, one thing I noticed was that there was a lack of space and resources. There's a lack of opportunity for artists to create. When I was in Chicago, any artist could, form a theater company because there's so many storefront theaters, and you can figure out how to put together a nonprofit, and there's resources for that. But in Nashville, there was just this lack of support for what I thought was the creative community. And I noticed that there was a hunger for it, but there was also this spirit of collaboration. Mark and I have worked together a few times. We've partnered with other local organizations. So my goal was to create an organization that supported the creative community, that was collaborative, that partnered, and that looked at the resources that were lacking and figure out how we could provide those resources.
Cool. And the spirit of community, what I hear that's also implied in that is that community doesn't just mean ticket buyers. And I'm curious, Mark, because what you and I talked about a little bit, when your relationship with it's Ozarts, sharing work with community. Can you talk a little bit more about that in addition to answering the earlier question?
Yeah, I like to think of the word center, like arts center, as both a verb and a noun, and that we're trying to provide a place where people can create community, can dive deep into their art, creative laboratory of sorts, and the audience is essential to that, but the artist comes first. It's sort of artist-centric. The decisions about programming are made largely based on what artists in Nashville need to see in order to be part of a larger conversation about the evolution of the art forms, what can inform their own work, what can inspire them, and not in a required reading way, but in a way that will incite conversation and dialogue. And the audience is such a crucial part of that one of the first things I did when I was consulting with Oz, while still in Los Angeles running Red Cat, was to cut the ticket prices virtually in half, which doubled attendance and doubled income, frankly, but create more opportunities. And we actually went a little too far that 1920 season, but we were saved by a tornado and COVID, so it all worked out. It's important that it be centered around the art and the artists so that the audience is part of this journey and part of this creative and curiosity-driven process, and don't necessarily see themselves just as consumers. I mean, yes, they pay for their ticket and they feel like they're contributing to the process in a way, but and that is a little bit difficult to define sometimes, but you know it when you feel it. And that is an ongoing dialogue. I mean, because we're bringing artists that we think artists can benefit from seeing, generally those are not going to be household names. So most of the people in the audience, too, are coming to see someone they've never heard of before. So it's a unique challenge. You need to find the audiences as well as the artists that will respond to the work. And very proud, and I think it's essential that the audience is diverse and is young or of all ages and is truly curious and engaged.
Back to starting with the younger end of the spectrum, because we hope that they will grow older with us and age with us. Both of you have worked in many different markets and places. Mark in Seattle and Los Angeles. Jennifer, you listed where you've been a little bit all over the country. I'm really curious, what practices, that experience that you're like, okay, great, this isn't my first job coming into the organization. You're like, we did this in Seattle, we can also do it here. And what practices did maybe you realize, oh, that worked in Seattle or Los Angeles or Detroit or DC, but it's not going to work here? Which practices have you found are specific to being in the Nashville community?
Well, I'll jump in there because there's a lot that I try to bring from city to city. On the boards in Seattle, which was the place I began working in this business, was founded by artists for artists and was a relatively informal organization, primarily dance artists, but also writers and theater artists. And in fact, the whole idea of presenting came about because one of them might have had an experience taking an amazing workshop in New York and seeing a performance, and they realized, we could you have an extra bedroom, we could bring that artist, we could get 20 people to pay $15, or at that time $8 for a master class, and we could probably get 40 people to pay $10 for a performance. So it became part of a creative act as opposed to something that was from the outside. The balance that I've tried to achieve between import and export activities involves creating opportunities for artists to create something in a safe environment. They're not running up lots of debt on many credit cards. I've never been accused of making anybody rich, but we make an honorable attempt to provide what is needed and essential to be able to create something. In Seattle and then in Los Angeles, we had, on the low end of the spectrum, a program called 12 Minutes Max in Seattle for informal showing of new works and works in progress. In LA, we had a similar program we called Studio, and it was quarterly. In Seattle, it started every month. First was called the Second Sunday Series, in fact. But then now in Nashville, the next level of that development was a New Works Lab, a New Original Works Festival in LA, Northwest New Works Program and Festival in Seattle, and here the Brave New Works Lab, which is an annual opportunity for artists to propose a new idea, to develop it in a shared format, sort of short form way. And here there have been 12 projects supported in that way so far. In LA, over the course of 16 years, I guess it would have been about 160, and in Seattle, about 200 or so. So it's a long-term investment. Because we don't have a full technical staff and we kind of have to build the theater each time in this warehouse when we do something, it's a little harder to do the real informal monthly or quarterly programs for new works, but I think there can be a way. But the New Works Lab, now in its third year, is it three? About to have its fourth year, is a real important opportunity. And I think in time, projects can be developed through that, developed further, identified for further growth, and it can lead to be an important career opportunity.
I hear that the need is consistent from marketplace to marketplace, but the starting place may be different in terms of like whether or not you have a full-time staff or what the space is itself. And so there still need to be adaptations, but that doesn't mean that it's an entirely new idea or practice.
And audiences are different. I mean, I strive for radical accessibility and accessible radicality, meaning get people there, let them engage with it, try and introduce new ideas, but in a way that is curated in such a way that it doesn't necessarily scare people off right away. And then over time, you can take them further and further and further. Like this season compared to the 2019-20 season is that much more experimental, that much more afield, that much more interdisciplinary. And so far people are intrigued and seem to be going with it.
Meeting your community where they're at. Yeah, that's great. And then bringing them with you. Jennifer, what? Yeah.
As a community member, I'll plug Mark's organization. When I see a show at Oz, I think about it and I feel it for weeks and weeks and weeks. I mean, it is one of those kind of places where you can go and not know what to expect, and then you're just sort of drawn in by the work, by the artists and the story, and it just stays with you. So you're doing a great job.
Thank you.
I would say that I've learned more what I don't want to do here in my experience. I tend to collect, this is not, first of all, this is not any of the places that I've been before. It's a completely unique space. But I think the one sort of through line is that a cultural center, especially at the size and scope of TPAC and some of the organizations that I've worked with before, you have the opportunity to be relevant and to be a home for your community. And so the work must go into making your organization welcoming, where people can have a sense of belonging. And it is so important. Otherwise, what are you doing? You're a roadhouse or just another, venue. So the work has to be very intentional, and that goes from the board it goes to the staff. People need to feel a sense of belonging when they walk into a space. It's what you're putting on your stages. It's establishing trust. We did this study over COVID, and we found that people trusted their performing arts center to give them guidance on COVID regulations more than they trusted some of the news or medical experts they were seeing.
That's the power of art. Okay.
Because they have a relationship with their center. So for me, it was really coming into TPAC and saying, you know, what has worked before is when people feel like this is their performing arts center, that it belongs to them, that they have ownership in it and partnership in it. And it's a work in progress. You know, we're not there yet. I don't know if we ever will be. It's going to be a journey, and we're going to keep trying things and having conversations and learning. But the intention is that people come to our center, and whether they're on the stage, they're backstage, they're in the audience, they're working at the center, they all feel a sense of ownership and belonging.
And what a welcoming space and center it is, but you are currently in a state-owned building that will be decommissioned, and so you'll be in the process among trying to do the content work and the community relational work, but also of establishing and building a new building. And my last question for both of you is that these are crazy times that are ever shifting in the funding landscape, national philanthropy, in our local landscapes, philanthropically speaking, policy-wise, politically. What sort of steps or practices are you gearing up for or employing? And it's early days, but I'm just hoping that you might inspire some of us also how to join and continue to move forward together. I'm curious, what kind of practices are you taking on to find a way forward? Because you also have a lot of experience, and we know that it's been crazy in previous times, and we found a way forward. So I'm curious what we can learn from you as you're bringing that to your organizations and leading in the field.
We are in the process of, moving out of our institution, which is state-owned, and building a new performing arts center that will be independent, which is a great opportunity for us. We have a significant grant from the state, and we need to raise 20% to match those funds and move into this new facility. We're 100% finished with schematic design and just about to go into design development. And for us, the big question is, what is the future of performing arts? What does a future of a performing arts center look like? And you know, what I am most excited about and what I have fought so hard to retain are the rehearsal spaces. Honestly, the rehearsal and studio spaces. We currently don't have that in our current facility, and we know how necessary they are for the opportunities in our community. And so all of our new rehearsal and studio spaces will be performance equipped. We're putting in the ability to do performances outdoors, pop-up performances, utilize the space in new and creative ways. And, you know, funding is always an issue. You know, we're in the middle of a capital campaign, but the independence from being a state-owned facility to sort of controlling our own destiny and having our own venue is really exciting. So that to us is the big opportunity in terms of a sustainable business model going forward. You know, we are focused on increasing the amount of touring Broadway in our market, which will help us. Touring market generally is seen as a little bit more of a commercial venue, which allows us to have a bit of a business model sort of equalizer there, while we can raise money and we can spend some of our earnings on supporting local artists and investing in our dance series and supporting our resident organizations. So we, we're very intentional about the direction that we want to take our organization and our work. And it's really important, though, that we have the support. And we're finding that the more that we are engaging with community, we're finding that our base of support is growing and growing and growing. So it's nice to see that people are interested in what we're doing and investing in us.
One of the most common themes in the projects that we're doing this season is empowerment and power and a response to power and human survival and humanitarian motivation. So I remember in conversations we thought, depending on which way the election goes, everything is going to be a tragedy. And we're sort of there. But because when you talk about it being a crazy world, that's what comes to mind for me, first of all. I do think that people, Nashville is a blue city. The ratio of Democrat to Republican in terms of the last election was similar to California. The rest of the state, not so much, and I've never lived in a red state before. But I think more than a month ago, people will need to gather together with other people who want to pursue together in a curious way with the involvement of artists, ways to explore that issue and feel good about the people in their community and the people that are can guide and help make sense of this crazy, rapidly evolving world. And we may think sometimes that feels like preaching to the converted or to the choir, rather, but I do think it's still essential. In 2017, when I was at Red Cat, after Trump was elected the first time, we announced our season in two parts, and there was a chance to sort of rethink it somewhat. And there was a quote from James Baldwin that we put on the cover of our brochure, which I'm going to leave a couple of words out probably, but basically it's from his essay about the why creativity and the role of an artist in society. It said that to help enhance human awareness and consciousness is the most important thing we can do to prevent further damage. So achieving a greater understanding, a greater level of understanding of what's happening around us is one of the goals. On a more practical side, longer term, we also hope to find ways to build up that import-export balance and to create more opportunities for artists. And in terms of the artistic development, one of the things that I'm most interested in is a sort of dramaturgical development, especially in dance. I was very pleased to find that Nashville has a fairly strong audience for dance here, even contemporary dance. I think part of that is the work in the last 10 or 12 years that Banning has done, and the idea that there is a thriving ballet company here. But theater, not so much. It's difficult. I think in my anecdotal research, I've learned that a lot of people didn't really have much experience with theater, going to theater, and if they did, maybe it wasn't so great. But I think that dance is a great storytelling form in a quasi-narrative or in a poetic way, and I'm very interested in artists who are helping us to shape that, because dance, we can dance about the revolution, and it's very powerful. I remember when they eliminated fellowships at the National Endowment for the Arts, which eventually gave birth to the National Dance Project and other attempts to try and replace that, and the Doris Duke Foundation, et cetera. The ones that they didn't eliminate, they eliminated dance and visual arts and theater, everything except writing, because they felt writers were not a risk.
Little did they know. And that's such a beautiful segue. One, I appreciate both of you for sharing your perspectives. Also, the reminder of why I do this work is to work with artists that help me process the world that we're living in. And that experience of coming together can also give our audiences and communities the tools to weather these times and resilience and to continue to move forward. But writers aren't dangerous. What a beautiful transition. First up, please join me in thanking Mark Murphy and Jennifer Turner.
Thank you.
And then please, let's give a welcome, warm applause for Nashville poet and pop-up bookstore owner, Ciona Rouse.
Hi, I'm just a non-risky writer here. Funny how they're coming for the books first, banning the books. We are going to be non-risky writers together. No, let's get dangerous and write, which means we're going to get into our bodies, because language begins in the body. We find words when we're young so that we can express our bodily needs. And our language first begins just as body language. So it's so important that we recognize where language is born and get into our bodies as we write, all right? So I'm going to invite you into a process. If you've heard of speed dating, I want you to think of this like speed dating language, all right? It's going to be fast. It's going to be faster than I would normally want you to write, but I kind of like that. We're going to get kind of just animal with the language and see what comes out, all right? If you have paper, I definitely invite you to do paper, pen, pencil. But if you only have your phone or a laptop, whatever you need to use, but we're going to play with some language. So go ahead and get yourselves prepared with that. There is this book that we're celebrating, Artists on Creative Administration, and it's actually launched me into a couple of poems, which I did not expect on a book about administration. So it is, of course, there's artists writing, and so they have challenged even what it means to write about administration, and it's been really inspiring. One of the inspiring parts is from Pioneer Winter, and yes, who we will hear from in a minute. And there's this line, and I love it, and it says, all bodies are in a cycle of becoming. All bodies are in a cycle of becoming. And so that's going to be our big prompt. And then I'm going to give you small prompts along the way so that you can get into writing about what your body is becoming. A couple of rules. So the first rule is to not overthink it. Literally, let it be animal and whatever's coming out. Even if I'm asking you something that makes you think for a minute, try to go with the first thought and just write it down, see where it goes. I'm going to invite you to write about 2 things for each prompt that I give you. But I also want you to let the prompts fall on you like rain. Again, I'm going to move through them quickly. So you know how with rain, you might get wet by some drops, but your neighbor isn't getting those same drops on them. That's fine. So if you miss the next prompt that I give, that's fine. Keep going with the one that you're on until you catch another raindrop. All right? Let's do that. Okay. The first prompt that I want you to write about is your earliest memory of movement. So try to go back as far as you possibly can to some of those earliest movements that you made. Try not to let it be something that your parents told you you did, but that you really remember being in your body doing. I won't do this for all prompts, but I'll give you just one example. When I was a kid, I thought I had superpowers, but I would put them on. And I would always do the shimmy thing and then reach my hands in the air to show that my superpowers were on. So that's an early body movement. Let it fall like rain. If you're not ready to move on, that's fine. But I want you to think of one movement that you made in high school, two movements that you made in high school. Whatever you want to do with high school, whatever you want to do with movements. 2 movements that you made in high school. How did you move when you were 21? How did you move when you were 21? How do you move at home? How do you move at home? What are 2 movements that you did this morning? I bicycled my shoulders as I was walking my dog. What are 2 movements you remember doing this morning? What color is movement? What color is movement? What is the scent, the smell of dance? What is the scent, the smell of dance? What is the animal of art? What is the animal of art and how does it move? What moves you and how are you moving others? What moves you, and how are you moving others? Okay. So now you've gathered some language. Kiese Lehman, in a workshop I took with him, he calls it kind of sifting through your garden, that exercise that we just did in gathering language. And so now you can turn it into a bouquet of something. And so I'm going to invite you on your own to turn it into what I like to call a list poem about your cycle of your body becoming, the cycle of your body becoming. So you can use that language, start to put them into sentences, phrases, however you want to put it, to start creating a poem for yourself. But because we are gathered together and we are one body in movement together here in this space, I'm also going to invite you to create what's called a cento. That means that several poets, actually technically 100 poets, but it doesn't matter how many, several poets contribute a line to a work of art. And so at some point before you leave, I would like for you to contribute one of your lines from the work that you put together. And there is a vase outside of this door. You can write it down on a piece of paper, drop it into there, and then I get to play with your language and put these lines together, and we'll see what we're becoming together. All right? Thank you. Thank you for playing with me. Keep writing as we're gathering into the next phase.
Could I invite our contributing authors, Banning, Bouldin, and Pioneer Winter, to join Ciona and I on stage? Would you like to sit there? Okay, you can have this one.
Beautiful. What am I supposed to invite? Oh, it's okay.
Ciona, thank you so much for sharing a little bit of your process, kind of where to begin. And we were really excited to create this moment for conversation because we had choreographers in putting together their essays for artists on creative administration working with the written page. And it's a very different process. It's a different relationship to time, it's a different relationship to sort of permanency. And since you're have more experience possibly in the written word as a practice, I'm curious if you could share with us, do you start in different places when you are writing poems for yourself versus maybe doing some of your dramaturgical work in dialogue with museum curators? And, you know, everyone could just say, oh, it's all language, but you have a different sort of versatility in that practice. Can you tell us a little bit more?
Yeah. I feel like whenever I am writing, I am... So often I think writers say that they're pulling from within, and for many people that may just be it. But I feel like even my within is filled with the without. Mm-hmm. Like what my grandmother said is just there in my gut, you know. Mm-hmm. What things I've seen in the earth have now settled in my chest, and so I'm constantly pulling from something outside of me. So it's very similar, honestly, that I start to spelunk this thing that I've experienced in the world and then start to put language towards it, play with language around it, and see what kind of playground I can make from it. And so obviously when I'm working with art or, you know, responding to dance or responding to visual art, perhaps the way I posture myself is different in that I'm actually sitting in front of it, standing in front of it. You know, you will see me at the First Art Museum, like on the floor, doing something weird sometimes. But it is still receiving a moment, language, like I'm just letting it pour into me wherever I am, and then putting it on the page.
I love the visual of you laying on the floor in a museum, and so much of this, whether it's bringing what your grandmother says and your gut and your whole self, and then physically relocating your body in the process resonates, because something we often talk about in CAR as a program is you may lead rehearsals and then you are still the same body and person leading a board meeting or taking that meeting with a prospective funder. And so why are we always kind of divorcing these two practices instead of embracing the whole self? Banning and Pioneer, I'm wondering if you can reflect, like when we started this process with the book, which is almost 3 years ago, and that in itself took a different relationship to time. But I'm curious if you might reflect on like what the challenges were with the task at hand, if you'd be willing to talk about that, or reflect it as a question to Ciona about writing process and practice and reconciling it for yourselves.
I think for me, two of the biggest challenges. One was that it's entirely a solo practice, and for me in my choreographic practice, I really thrive off of being with groups of dancers and the exchanges that take place. And so, once things were in a place where Tanya, our incredible editor, and I were able to go back and forth, and it felt very conversational, and her influence was also helping to shape my writing. I felt myself really come alive. And the iterative nature of my making, I think, choreographically showed up in the sort of editorial process of development, and that felt very familiar and like a place that I could find home in the aloneness of writing. The permanency of the published essay was like, what? Because for me, even I often joke with dancers that I've worked with that it's like I'm a terrible rehearsal director. Never hire me for that, because I always see something that I want to shift or change, or even like a work that's finished is never for me really finished. And like a remount is not a remount. It's like it's always a recreation with whoever is with. So there was something about that part of the process that I found once we were nearing the finish line, it was really kind of harrowing. But yeah, I found a lot of overlap in the sort of iterative nature of the process of going back and forth with the editor and the conversation there that felt really familiar to my creative process. It was a comfort.
Is it would you call it a solo practice that you do, Ciona? And if so, how and when do you bring people into it?
I know, that's such a good question, and as you were talking, I thought, I'm often saying that it's not. It's so collaborative, but again, I think of the fact that I'm always pulling from the world and as well as what's within me. So I'm constantly in collaboration. But also I have a circle of writers, and I write with a circle of writers every week. And I get to collaborate because I'm in Nashville with musicians quite often. And so I have found a way to make it really communal, and I love that. I started a group called Poetry Church. I think in the book, one of the choreographers started a dance church, and I thought that was really cool. And that was what we did on Sundays, is we would feed off of each other. So there are ways to, and it is great when it gets there. I like doing it on my own, but I also like going to that other place. And ultimately, we're never doing any of it on our own, right?
Pi, what came up for you as a choreographer in this new writing practice?
So I entered the car experience feeling really resentful of the space, or at least the space that I perceived between my art making and then administration. And I was so resentful of the time in front of the computer, the time writing grants, the time taken away from the studio. But it was through the car experience that I realized how much clarity I got from those moments. You know, how something is often not real until you name it.
Right.
And the importance of naming something, even in its infancy, and allowing the name to shift. And then my relationship to time. I talk a little bit about it in my essay, so I'll save it for that. But I will say that it is a harrowing experience to feel like what you've written down can't be changed. right? It feels like it's sort of a time capsule. And like Banning, I'm notorious for making changes constantly. I believe in a living work. I believe in the beauty of ephemerality. But then I'm reminded also that like dancers love photographs. We love getting our picture taken. And isn't that also a time capsule, right? You know, so like, I might not be the same person I was 2 years ago when I wrote that essay, and I might even disagree with some of the things I wrote. But I'm also not the same person that I was when a photograph was taken, and can't I still find that beautiful to look back on and to remember that? Yeah.
And I think what is amazing about being a writer as well is that then it keeps getting created by the readers and how they're receiving it. And so that can go on forever. And it feels so permanent, but every reader is pulling a different thing out of each word, you know?
Yeah.
Each sentence, or something's getting to them in a different way, and that creates another thing.
It's a big part, you know, I even as a contributing author and then like trying to hold the space for this project felt that same sort of like, oh my God, it's fixed, but now this is going on, and what is about that? And, you know, and it wasn't until the publication date in September 2024 that I've been able to move. I was like, oh, yeah, just because it's bound doesn't mean it's done.
Right.
And it can continue to live on. Each person that I get to speak with that has read something that made meaning out of it in a different way, that reminds me, like, we can keep doing sort of like mental footnotes and adding to that. And this is how it relates to the next thing inside of that. In this relationship to like what is fixed or a space, I am curious, Ciona, as our local bookseller, thank you very much, and Bardstown Books and Bourbon, what is a pop-up bookstore? Why have you found this calling to create a pop-up bookstore? And maybe it brings it back around to relating your work into community again.
Yeah, I'm opening up a bookstore bar in Nashville, and we've already started in pop-up mode. And the way we are popping up is in many spaces. So we aren't occupying one space. And usually the spaces have bourbon involved, because it's one of my favorite things. And then language. And so we've been going lots of different areas, having poets speak. We've had people talk about banned books. We have a lot of really great plans over the next year, so I hope that those of you in Nashville or those of you not in Nashville can come back and visit. But yeah, eventually we will have a space, a home that we've created for the spirit of poetry, ultimately, is my goal. We are a music city, I say, but we're also a bard's town. And when I first moved to Nashville, like Banning's essay talks about, I had such a hard time finding my people, my community. And so I had this dream that, or, you know, I found them. I kept creating things to find them. But a few years ago, I had a dream, and I occupied this space. And I saw that people were coming in there and finding their home there, and calling themselves a poet for the first time. And the dream was very visual, and I loved it, and I wrote it down, every little bit of it. I loved my life in that dream, and I loved the life of the community in that dream. And so that's how it's come to be. And right now, we're just moving around. And there are moments that I think I kind of just want to move around the whole nation doing this, because it is great fun. But for right now, we're moving around Nashville, and then we'll be in a permanent space this time next year.
Excellent. Well, congratulations. It's very exciting. Please join me in thanking Ciona and Banning and Pioneer for a brief conversation. And to wrap us up, we're going to hear from Pioneer Winter as a contributing author and his essay in the book.
8 and 1, the end becomes the beginning when everybody dances. I founded Pioneer Winter Collective because I felt limited and unfulfilled as a dancer. The way I communicate best is through choreography. As a choreographer, I collaborate with other artists whose voices are intrinsic to our work, our relationship rooted in the understanding that our sole objective is sharing our human experience as completely as possible. Our company dramaturg, Jeremy Stoller, describes our process. We engage deeply with power and consent, leading and following. Performers share the role of leadership, and we endeavor to make those handoffs intentional and fluid. My earliest memory of this flow, and this reminds me of the prompt that we heard earlier. I'm 5 years old, standing on the tops of my mom's feet as she dances in the living room. I remember the feeling of shifting from one foot to the other, the continuity of her movements and my role as her abiding partner, neither controlling nor directing the dance, but a part of it nonetheless. A collaboration. I especially remember the shim sham, and if there are any tappers in the audience, shim sham is one of those really unique steps in dance that starts on an 8 rather than a 1. So it creates an easy fluidity, so you're counting at 8 and 1, 2 and 3, 4 and 5 and 6 and 7, 8 and 1. And so there's this, it's endless. And it reminds me that endings are also beginnings, that there's a connection among all things in dance, from ideation to administration to performance, and that everything we do is a cycle of repeated becoming. It was this realization that led me to forming PWC as an intergenerational and physically integrated dance theater company. Those are also words that I learned later. I didn't know that what we were doing was intergenerational. I didn't know that what we were doing was physically integrated. I just knew that all bodies have value, and the stage is a very boring place when there's absolute uniformity and when everybody looks exactly the same. And I knew that just even from the start that wasn't something that I was interested in doing. I began choreographing in 2010 at the age of 22 while I was in graduate school for epidemiology and public health. I didn't think I was going to be a choreographer or dancer. I saw a lot of bad things in the world, a lot of things that need to be fixed. And up until that point, my experience with art was mostly decorative. Through an internship program, I matched with a small nonprofit that focused on HIV/STD testing and prevention. Doing this work, I was reflecting on the devastation that HIV/AIDS brought across communities to which I belong, the queer community, the dance community. We've all heard of the missing generation. And how we carry that in our bodies. The dancer's body is often imagined as strong and powerful, which is not the image we are presented with of someone living with HIV. Stigma and discrimination cause us to fear rather than to seek understanding. An individual living life as an HIV-positive person can dance and their body can be strong, and disease doesn't need to define them. I sought a conversation with my community about the stigma of the disease and to explore my own relationship to it for mutual healing. I applied for a community grant to present Reaching the Surface in partnership with a clinic where I was completing my internship. I put a call out for dancers affected by HIV/AIDS willing to participate in a project that aimed to confront and dismantle stigma. The project took on new meaning during the rehearsal process when one of the performers got tested at the partnering clinic and their test came back positive. As they confronted their internalized trauma and fears, I strove to create a safe, vulnerable, and creative rehearsal space where dance was able to provide a means to communicate when nothing else could. I'll add an annotation here that 10 years later, I received my own HIV-positive diagnosis. And despite all of my knowledge and lived experience, I had to confront my own internalized traumas and fears. Yet, The space I'd created through this work and our collaboration was still there, now supporting me. Creating a space intentionally held for others, only to find myself unintentionally inhabiting it and now being held, was a deeply queer experience for me. And I find that in a lot of my work, this idea of iteration continues, and that I am constantly creating work with dancers, with collaborators, with other human beings that serves our future body and serves our future self, intentionally or unintentionally. I found that by willingly sharing our vulnerability through dance, we move out of the crosshairs of judgment toward empowerment. We take control of ourselves and we model the embrace of everybody. Our collaboratively devised work aims to expand the definition of all dance is and can be, so that all bodies survive, thrive, and are witnessed. This bringing together of queer and queered collaborators from a variety of backgrounds and experiences requires a balancing of individual and group impulses. We reflect that we are growing into our collectivity, our ability to match each other's movements. We are doing this by building a shared vocabulary for gaining a better understanding of our individual needs, physicalities, and of the histories that imbue them. I talk about projects that I've done, Leaders of Equality Through Arts and Performance, which was a queer leadership program that we did from 2012 to 2018. Stopped that when I realized that there was mission creep and that there were other organizations in Miami that were really centering queer youth a lot more than my organization could. And so we backed off of that, and I found other ways of giving back to the community. One way was Workshop Coin, existing to incentivize rehearsal, skill building, and peer-to-peer resource sharing among Miami-based drag artists. These are performers who don't typically have access to rehearsal spaces, meaning that they rehearse either in cramped quarters or not at all. PwC provides free rehearsal space, staggered arrival times, stipends that match the performer's gig fees, with the ultimate goal of investing in the craft and technique of queer performers and elevating performance art in South Florida. I continue to look for ways to better serve my art and my community, to stay present in the becoming of my body, my craft, and the collective as a whole. In 2022, we launched Creative Connections, a resident artist structure designed to support artists offstage while accelerating their own creative growth on their terms. This support has taken many different forms, including paying rent, leasing a car, getting out of debt, making a short film centering Black and brown queer joy, publishing a book on sexual trauma and healing, hosting free workshops and panels, developing a movement vernacular, and creating a series of labs that explore majorette dance and disability. Through Creative Connections, one dancer, Andrea LeBay, developed a solo performance, Misenfranchised. In it, she excavates the 60-plus years of her life as a quintessential showgirl in the 70s and 80s, and her experiences living with HIV, addiction, and being unhoused. Andrea wrote me after, "This was the first time in my adult life creating and recreating sober, learning to give myself grace, to embrace my story with imperfect vulnerability. That was uncomfortable, yet was the thing that seemed to resonate most profoundly. And yes, Pi, it was like gestation and birthing, and the postpartum experience wasn't the most comfortable, but again, one of growth. Sharing my feelings with like-minded folks reinforced the need for connection in this artist recovery life. The achievement was going through all of it, sober. Witnessing Andrea's journey reaffirms the critical importance of intergenerational spaces where artists can explore and share their truths. From this, Andrea has initiated a weekly gathering for people in recovery called Recovery in Motion, for folks that are on their recovery journey and want to enhance their 12-step program with movement and dance on a weekly basis. And as of this week, we just had our 10th session. That wouldn't have happened were it not have been a project initiated by a dancer through Creative Connections. Ultimately, the success of this lies in finding a balance between supporting individual artistic growth and fostering identity. I hope this is a new model that will radically reshape the choreographer-dancer relationship and foster stronger bonds and more consistent experimentation. At the time that I wrote this, we were in the second cycle of Creative Connections, and we are about to announce the fourth cycle. And with each time, it's different. With each time, we're finding out more and more. But as ever, I aim to remain in this process of becoming, alongside a growing community that will change with me, challenge and support my growth as I do theirs, an abiding partner, neither controlling nor directing the dance, but a part of it nonetheless. Thank you.
How about a big round of applause for all of our speakers today? Thank you so much for spending this time with us. Just a little bit of extra gratitude and housekeeping on your way out. A special thanks to our Nashville Host Committee for helping us design not only our Making Moves Nashville event, but this entire Learning Journey weekend here. Also to Bardstown Books and Bourbon, maybe you need an extra copy of Artists on Creative Administration or two, so Ciona can help make sure that that happens for you. Also, I want to acknowledge thank you to Georgia and the Nashville Public Library, the Mellon Foundation now, the Knight Foundation, and especially for this weekend, the National Endowment for the Arts. Please, if you feel so moved, make sure that you add your contribution to the cento that Ciona will be putting together. And with that said, have a great day.